In this video, we're going to look at starting to make a 2D platforming character. Now I've gone ahead and imported my dog sprites. You can use whatever sprites you want, of course, but I've just imported these as an example. So in order to make the player character, I'm going to go ahead and create a new scene. And as our root node here, we've been using Area 2D, and I'm going to show you a new one, which is to use Kinematic Body 2D. So Kinematic Body 2D here is what I'm going to create. And then again, much like with our Area 2D, this is very similar, we need to have a collision shape 2D. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a child that is a collision shape 2D. I generally recommend the shape for this to be a rectangle. Circles can get a little weird. Capsules can be good though too. But I'm going to use a rectangle since my dog is kind of, rectangle shaped. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a child node that is an animated sprite. And set up the frames for that. I'm just going to very quickly set up one animation for my default so that I have my dog there, but you can of course set up all your animations now if you'd like, and then continue on this video when you're done. Since I've already shown you how to do animations, I'm not going to recover that in this video, so I'm going to just adjust my collision box here. So I'm going to try to make it so my collision box, the bottom of my collision box is pretty accurate, but I'm going to go ahead and leave off the tail of the dog and his head a little bit, just because I don't like it when he's like standing on the very edge and he's standing on his tail. So that is good there. To make this work, of course, we're going to need a script. So I'm going to go ahead and rename my child or my root node to dog and save this so that I can have that done already, and create a script. I always like to put those on the root. So dog.gd, go ahead and create. I'm going to get rid of, well, you can leave the ready function there, but what we really want to look at right now is our process. Now we've used process in the past, and that's what was good for us, but for our kinematic body here, our kinematic body 2D, what we want to actually use is physics process. So I'm going to change the name of this function here to physics process, and then get rid of this pass here. And what we want to do initially is set up our dog to be controlled to do left and right with the arrow keys. So I'm gonna show you a little bit of a different setup instead of what we did before, where we just had our, well, let's start with our if statement. So if, hopefully you remember this stuff, input dot is action pressed, and then we have our UI right, and then I'm going to go ahead, it's going to throw errors because these aren't finished yet, but I'm going to go ahead and just get these two if statements set up here. UI right and UI left. Oops, left. What we did in the past was just in each of these if statements, we just used transform.translate to go ahead and move. So what we're going to do in this one's a little different. We're going to make a movement vector. So a vector is just like a 2D, it's basically like a line in 2D. It's a direction is what it really is. But it's, if you think about your 2D coordinate system, from 0, 0 to any position, that could be considered a vector. So 5, 5 is the 0, 0 to 5 in the X and 5 in the Y. So what we're going to do is create a vector, class vector here. So we're going to have velocity. That is a vector. And to start out with, the dog's not moving, so I'm just going to give it 0, 0. And then what we're going to do is, if he's moving right, we're just going to change the velocity vector, and then at the very end we'll actually do the moving. So we're going to spend our physics process every frame, we're going to take in inputs and other things that have happened and adjust our velocity vector, and then at the very end we'll actually do the moving. So if we're going right, we want the velocity.x, so x gets you the first coordinate, y gets you the second, equals, and then this is where you'll have to figure out a good number for speed. Right, I think, is positive. So we'll say like 100. And for left, we're going to do the same thing, except we want that to be negative. So let's go ahead and check how that works. So I'm going to go back to my level here that I've created, and I'm going to put my dog, remember I'm going to put the T scene in here. I'm going to go ahead and add that and make it a child of level, not a child of tile map. And of course it's always going to want to put it in the upper corner there. That's fine. Oop. I accidentally opened him, not clicked on him. So let's bring him down. The best thing to do is always kind of position him just a little bit above your tiles, because it can get weird if he gets stuck inside. So if you start him just a little bit above, we'll look at gravity in just a second. This will usually work a little better. So let's go ahead and test how this works. So I have not yet set up a main scene, so let's go ahead and do that very quickly. And look at how this runs. So I'm going to try my arrow keys here, and they don't do anything. And here's why. Let's go back to our dog and look at the script. We've set our velocity here, but we haven't actually done the moving. So last time we used transform.translate to move, and we could do that here. At the end here, we could say translate . We could use the translate. That's not what we want for the kinematic body. That's for the area 2D. That works really well. What we want is called move and slide. So move and slide takes two things. One is going to be this velocity vector we've set up, and the other is basically an up vector. And I'm just going to tell you what that is. It's going to be 0, -1. That means that up in our game is no y and pointing in the up direction, which is negative. So let's go ahead and save that and test our game again. And now we can see that our dog moves. Now you can see that there is a little bit of a problem. Once he starts going in one direction, he never stops. That's because we have not told him to. He's also kind of floating and continues to float. So let's look at that. Let's fix the first problem first, which is the moving left and right and then not stopping. Right now what happens is, if any action is pressed, we set it to 100. We set the x velocity to 100 or -100, depending on left or right, but it never goes back to 0. So it stays 100 basically continuously until we set it to the other one, -100, and then it stays that until we set it to the next one. So what we want to do is say, if no button is pressed, set the velocity to 0. So we're going to modify this slightly. We're going to change this one here to an elif. And what that means is it'll say, if right is pressed, do this, set it to 100. Otherwise, if this is false, check this. So if right is true, if right is pressed is true, it's just going to do this and then skip all the way over this, skip over this next statement, go down to the move and slide. If this is false, it's going to check the next one. And then the last thing we want to do is say, so if right's pressed, do this, if left's pressed, do this. Otherwise, if neither of them are pressed, and we can use that, say just else for that, we want velocity.x to be 0. Let's go ahead, save, and run that again. All right, so now when I push, he moves, and when I don't push, he does not move. He stops moving. And that is exactly what we want. Before we move on, there's one more thing I want to cover very quickly. Right now our dog moves left and right just fine, but he's still always facing left. So let's look at fixing that very quickly. If we go to my dog and have the animated sprite selected, you can see there's this flip H. And when I select it, the dog flips his direction. Now I've cleverly put my collision box, centered my dog and put my collision box in a place that it works pretty well for each direction, because you see the collision box doesn't flip. But I'm going to show you how to do this with code so we can have him flip his direction when he's moving left and right. So let's go to his script real quick. How you get to that via script is we need our animated sprite, which if you remember, you can get using the $ notation, animated sprite, and then we can say flip_h and set it to true or false. Now the dog is initially facing left, so we want flip h to be true when he's facing right, and false when he's facing left. Let's have a quick look at that. So now you can see that my dog faces the correct direction that he's moving.